Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages as they arrive. And it's time to see what's making the headlines with the senior associate editor at the New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe, and The Sun's political editor, Harry Cole. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. Welcome to you both. Thank you both very much for coming on and doing this. Let's see what's on some of those front pages. The Financial Times hears that gas prices could be among the factors to propel inflation beyond 18% next year. Soaring inflation is also the lead for the Times. The Eye says Liz Truss has come under fire for backtracking on a promise to hold an emergency budget if she gets into number 10, instead downgrading it to a so-called fiscal event. The Guardian reports that when Ms Truss was Environment Secretary, her department cut millions of pounds in funding from initiatives to keep sewage off the country's beaches, something which has recently become a significant problem. According to The Telegraph, proposals are being made to double payments to UK households who host Ukrainian refugees to encourage families not to withdraw from the scheme at the end of its first 6-month term. The Metro is criticising people who misuse A&E departments, including one person who walked in complaining of dandruff. And The Star says that having a nap at work is good for us and makes us more productive, according to research. Do text or tweet if you spot me nodding off. A reminder, though, that by scanning the QR code you can see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch along with us. And to go through those papers are Rachel Cunliffe and Harry Cole. Lots of good selections for us this evening, guys. The Financial Times, we're starting off with the British edition of the Financial Times. These projected inflation figures, 18%. Rachel, it's eye-watering, isn't it? This is one City analysts that have suggested this. Citibank have suggested they fear it could reach that high. In terms of the political impact that this will have, it's enormous, isn't it?
It is enormous. There is also a sense, though, that we see these figures on the front pages of the newspapers and they keep getting higher and higher. The inflation rate keeps getting higher. It was predicted that it was going to be 13% in December. Now you've got this analysis suggesting 18% by January. You've also got the increase in the energy price cap, which feels less cap-like the more we go on. Energy bills expected to go up to over £3,500 in the October price cap rise, then again to 4,000 in January. Here in the FT predicted 5,800 by April. There is almost a point at which the numbers sort of start to lose their meaning, and it just becomes sort of chaos and economic devastation. But they haven't lost their meaning. This is a very key challenge that you would expect to be the national priority for any government. Unfortunately, we don't really have a government at the moment. We have a caretaker government and a government in waiting, and so we're stuck in this holding pattern until the 6th of September, when we might get a prime minister, and top on their priority list will be exactly this: inflation and energy prices.
And Harry, we're hoping, well, we know we're going to get the energy figures on Friday in terms of this price cap, but the predictions for that too coming along. We've got inflation on one track and we've got these spiralling energy costs on the other. Of course, they're affecting each other, but we're not expecting good news on Friday, are we?
No, and also they've tweaked the rules. As Rachel says, the cap is actually not really a cap at all anymore because it's going to change every 3 months. And the wilder expectations, by January, this could be hitting £5,500, a phenomenal amount of money that's going to have a dire impact on people's bank accounts. Both the candidates now are they're actually, as I said on this show before, there's not actually a massive amount of difference really between those two candidates now. Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, who is expected to be her chancellor, both promising help with the vulnerable. The Labour Party have sort of set the bar pretty high with their sort of universal bailout. I suspect Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng will go for something a little bit more targeted. But it's also the impact on business that needs to be remembered. It's not just households that are going to be suffering this summer. Hospitality firms, small firms that have only really been getting back on their feet since the pandemic, and now being hit by crippling business costs for their energy, and so they're going to need something, small businesses especially. So yeah, an in tray from hell for a new administration.
And Rachel, moving on to the eye, they're saying that Liz Truss is going to U-turn on having a budget. We were expecting the 21st of September there to be a sort of mini budget. The eye is suggesting that she's going to call it a fiscal event rather than a mini budget because that will avoid detailed scrutiny. I mean, she's not going to be able to avoid detailed scrutiny, is she? Because as you've both pointed out, we've had a whole summer where nothing has been done about all of the cost of living fears that people have. People are going to want to see action when the new Prime Minister is put in place.
They're definitely going to want to see action. The question is how thoroughly the strategy is costed and what else has to fall by the wayside because of that. So the eye is reporting that the reason for downgrading the emergency budget to a so-called fiscal event isn't just to do with the words. It's to do with the fact that when you have a budget, you have to get economic forecasts and you have to cost everything out, and you have to show, in this case, how inflation will impact the government's ability to balance its budget and maintain fiscal responsibility. Now, but by not doing that, the implication is that Liz Truss can go ahead with the tax cuts that she's already promised and a full package of support that Harry alluded to. I'm sure she's working very hard on, and can worry about whether that's paid for in debt or in other ways a bit later, because the inflation that we're seeing will have eroded the extra budgetary surplus that she was playing with in order to make those promises. Now, I kind of think obviously it's an important point whether the budget gets balanced, and those forecasts are important and should definitely be done. But I think when it comes to the intro of the new Prime Minister, it is going to be a case of how quickly can we move to get help to the people who need it the most, to prevent thousands, millions of people from going hungry or cold this winter. That's going to be the priority. Work out the costings later, just like we saw in COVID.
And of course, given that all of the polls appear to be suggesting that Liz Truss will be the next Prime Minister, although, you know, we all know as journalists not to trust the polls. Harry, people are now going back over her previous record and previous departments, and this brings us on to The Guardian, page 1, and the story that we've been covering today about the amount of sewage on our beaches and the amount of the water companies have been emitting onto the beaches, and they're now suggesting that it was all down to Liz Truss cutting money for them when she was Environment Minister.
Yeah, two things. Just one very quickly on the eye front page. I think it's a little bit unfair because the OBR basically a proper forecast will take 10 weeks. So what you're saying is actually if they wanted to move quickly on cost of living, they need to do this sooner rather than later. And actually, if you wait for that full costings, which will come in the spring anyway, it would take 10 weeks for the OBR to put that together. And their basic argument is actually we have 10 weeks to wait. So I think it's a little bit unfair to suggest it's sort of deliberately trying to obfuscate where the money's coming from. What I find really interesting about this Guardian front page is Labour have woken up. And they have clearly had a look at the polls, and they have clearly decided that Liz Truss is going to win, because this is a Labour attack story tonight. It's been put together by their shadow environment team. They can tell the political toxicness of the beaches and the rivers of flowing, overflowing with sewage. It has to be said, I was in France, last week. Beaches were closed after a major thunderstorm in a similar way to the way they have been here. This is, the alternative is this sewage flows out of manhole covers and into the streets of MPs' constituents. If it doesn't go in the sea, yes, there is an argument that austerity right across Whitehall, the Environment Agency in particular had to find sort of £200 million worth of efficiency savings, as they called it. Yeah, I think it's going to be a rich scene for the opposition. They seem to have already decided that actually Rishi Sunak's not really worth their time to hammer Truss.
And talking about Rishi Sunak, Rachel, the Telegraph, page 1, apparently he's not going to be serving in Liz Truss's cabinet. I mean, I suppose no surprise here if she does end up being her Prime Minister that she wouldn't necessarily want Rishi on her team.
Can I just come back on something that Harry said? I'm so pleased that he mentioned international comparisons when it comes to sewage on beaches. We've got some New Statesman data analysis up today that shows that, yes, pollution is an issue across Europe, but Britain's beaches and river water is almost the most polluted and the dirtiest across the whole of Europe. And I think Harry's absolutely right that the story here really isn't about Liz Truss. It's about the attitude of the Cameron Osborne austerity project, which saw any slack in the system at all as wasteful spending that could be sort of trimmed down for a slimmer, fitter state. And we're actually finding out now, belatedly, that a lot of the slack in the system was there for a reason, be it extra capacity when it comes to hospitals and healthcare, or when it comes to money to make sure that the water companies are behaving appropriately and monitoring how much sewage they put in our seas and our rivers. As for Sunak serving in the cabinet, well, we've come a long way from that early debate when they were both so magnanimous and chivalrous towards each other. Would you invite your opponent to serve in your cabinet? Of course I would. I think they're brilliant. I think this contest got beyond that in terms of nastiness quite a while ago.
Looking at some of the inside pages now, and Harry, actually, this is actually still on the front page. This is the Telegraph. Refugee host cash should be doubled. This is Lord Harrington, and he's suggesting that families who are hosting Ukrainian refugees should get more than the £300 a month, which is they get at the moment £350, should be increased to £700. Largely because of the cost of living crisis, but also perhaps as some kind of recognition that it's not easy having somebody in your home, and it's for some of these people it's been 6 months.
Yeah, this has been bubbling around for a few days now, and Lord Harrington has decided to, I think, probably put his name to quotes that were already starting to appear over the weekend. We're into a strange place now, though, because it's tough for us to look at that story like that and work out whether he's saying that because it's going to happen, because he is the minister in charge, and he's, as ministers do, they sort of float ideas and trail them before the official announcement, or whether he's almost sort of lobbying his successor or the next government to do something because he thinks he's going to be out of a job, or perhaps he wants to catch the incoming administration's eye. So it's a weird one at the moment, because there's lots of these sort of stories up here where ministers who are in the caretaker sort of regime, the ones that haven't resigned, stayed in their jobs, but clearly, not making massive policy decisions, seem to be popping up in the papers all, the last few weeks with big ideas and new ideas, not actually saying they're going to do them, but they want to do them. And we don't actually, it's almost a sort of a phony war. We don't actually know whether it's going to happen or whether they're just lobbying.
Rachel, do you think in principle it's a good idea?
I think it's a very sad indictment of our present situation that a cost of living crisis that is primarily sparked by the increase in the price of oil because Russia chose to invade Ukraine. We're now seeing households, according to this article, who are only able to meet their day-to-day living costs because of that thank you payment they get from hosting Ukrainian refugees. It's all come full circle in a rather tragic way. But Lord Harrington makes the point in that article that these are individual households who are welcoming refugees into their homes, and if they weren't doing that, it would be the state that was picking up the bill through rental accommodation for them, and therefore they are in a way sort of saving the state money. I think a more important point is helping those Ukrainians work and set up lives here, if that is indeed what they want to do, and making sure that they can support themselves rather than relying on people's spare rooms.
OK, a final quick story from the International Financial Times, its front page. This is Apple staff. They're not as keen to go back into the office, are they, Harry? You two are both providing excellent examples of people working from home this evening. I'm less so here in the studio. But Apple staff, they say they've been able to do exceptional work from home.
We'd love to come back to the studio one day.
We'd love to have you.
I miss those days. And I have to say, I have been in the office all day today. It was my first day back after holiday, but I'd even put a tie on. This is something that's going to happen right across the developed world. You see it at the moment. The train I took in this morning, yes, it's middle of August, but it was pretty quiet. More and more people are actually, as a sort of silver lining of the pandemic, looking at how they how they can do their jobs more effectively. They argue. I'm sure the summer's weather has helped some people work from home. I suspect this summer, speaking anecdotally,
and it does depend on your job.
My head off. But look, this is a debate that's going to rage and rage and rage, because once you give someone a taste of freedom like that, it's very hard to take it away.